I was teaching a grade 8 class earlier this week, group of 13-year-olds. And once I got them quieted down to start the class off, I said to them, "Could anyone tell me a story from their own life of a time when they seized the moment, of a time when an opportunity came their way, an opportunity they knew would not last forever? There might have been some fear involved, but they grabbed that moment and ran with it." Now some of you will say, "Are you out of your mind asking 13-year-olds a question like this? Aren't their minds full of iPads and what they're going to do after school and where many places where they'd not rather be?" And to a certain degree, you're right. Although these are a very special group of students, very dedicated, very motivated by the practice of skills and wanting good marks and being able to achieve them, sometimes motivated by the fact that their parents paid $25,000 for that 1 year, but for whatever reason, even though they are a motivated group of students, their minds do wander. They are 13 years old, and sometimes they have a hard time focusing. The other day, I was a little farther back, I was with a group of 13-year-olds on the last period of Friday, and there were moments in that class when I thought back and thought, there is something about purgatory and karma. Some of the things I did when I was 12 and 13 years old to poor old Miss Hyslop and to poor old Mr. Carter, they're coming back to me now. But the Lord is good. And I think we have these things come back to us to test us and try us at times so that we can see the good and the possibility in them. And indeed, over the years and working with all our other wonderful teachers, I began to see that, yes, grade 8s, 13-year-olds, they do go off like a stormy sea sometimes. But if you're ready and you capture the moment, you can pull them in, and some of the conversations we've had, some of the innate spirituality, the belief that they are following God and God is with them, it's been so inspiring. So a hand went up at the back of that class this week. A 13-year-old raised their hand and said to me, "Father Crowther, I remember a time when I first came to this school. It was a special visitation day, and if a student wants to come to the school, they let them come in for one day and go around with the class." So he said, back in grade 6, I came into the school for the first time thinking I could join middle school. And he said, "I remember the very moment when I put my hand on the front door of that school, and I turned around and looked to my mother, and really every inch of my being wanted to go back." He said, "It was too much for me. The school was too big. There were so many people coming and going. I just wanted to go home and crawl under the covers." And I said to him, "So what made you open that door and go in?" And he said, "Well, it was because I had made the decision that I wanted a new school. I wasn't happy with the school that I was in, wasn't happy with what I was being taught, wasn't happy with how the students were reacting around me. And so I said to my parents, 'Can you find me another school?' And they went to all the trouble and they looked and they found Holy Trinity. And so by the time I got to that door, the wheels were in motion, things that I had started, and I was not going to stop the wave that was happening. I was not going to turn around and go back. I wanted to see it through. I could not go back." And he sat there back at the back of the class the way only a grade 8 student can, and he said, "You know, I am so happy to be here." At which point, 2 of his friends leaned over, one punched him on the shoulder and said, "Yeah, you speak it, man." And the other one put up his knuckle like that, and they both went like that, and the whole class erupted into this conversation, which I allowed to go on for about 30 seconds. And then I said, "Okay, class, let's get on with our last unit of Hinduism before we move into the life, death, resurrection, and ascension of Jesus." And so the period went. You know, it reminded me as I thought about this on the theme of seizing the day, taking advantage of the many gifts God gives us and not wasting them or hiding them in the ground. I thought back to a few years ago, I was in my late 40s, and a few years after coming to the school, and it was just beginning to dawn on me about the rhythm of life and the rhythm of students and how people learn and how you have to be patient with them and then just be ready to teach when they when the time is right. And I was on the East Coast, and I had just taken up the sport of windsurfing. I'd done it in my teens, but then I'd left it. But then in my late 40s, I guess it was my second half of life or midlife, whatever. But anyway, I got this windsurfer. And I went out on the water, and I fell in for about 3 weeks into the water. And then finally, I got my sea legs, and I was able to do the thing. It was a windy day. The waves were quite high. But I got onto that windsurfer, held it up, and it just took off over the waves. It is such an exhilarating, anybody here who's done it, you know what I mean? It carries you. It's like when they talk about the winds of God, it is true. And off I went, bouncing over the waves and holding on. I was having such a good time. And then all of a sudden, my 46-year-old arm started to feel a bit of the weight of the thing, and my stomach, which was not strong as it once was, started to feel the pain. And then the thing started rocking and shaking, and down into the water I went. And I came up, gasping for breath, my arms aching, and I looked, and I saw that the shore was one long way off. And immediately that fear, that panic that we heard in the gospel reading of that guy who knew what his master was capable of, that fear came in, and I saw how deep the water was. And all the Jaws movies I had ever seen, I heard this boom, 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 and I could just see these big sharks coming up at me. And quickly I swam over to the board, jumped on it again, my arms aching, pulled up the thing, but the wind was wild, and I got knocked down 3 times, and then sheer panic set in, and then all of a sudden I thought, wait a minute, why don't you just relax for a minute? So I held onto the board, up the waves I went, down the waves I went, and the longer I held on and relaxed, the more my mind started kicking in. I thought, this is a shallow bay, and there's been no great whites found for 50 years when they used to fish salmon, so I'm probably all right. And then I looked down and realized, well, wait, I have a life preserver on. What am I worried about? And then I started to enjoy the beautiful sun and the clouds of an August day. And then I looked up, and the shore was about halfway as far as it had been. The wind was blowing me back to shore. Everything would be okay. So just before I got back to shore, I jumped on that thing again. My arms rested. Off I went. I knew the rhythm of the sea a little bit better. I knew my own rhythm and had a beautiful time windsurfing. To seize the moment, to grab the day that God gives us. It is all about experience and practice, as we tell our students. It's about working at it. It's about feeling that fear, but not letting yourself be ruled by it. That's why I think that's one harsh Bible reading where the master, God, comes back and sees somebody who hasn't used their gift, and he says, outer darkness for you, and I'll take your money away. I've always found that harsh. And yet, it is true that we have these precious gifts and precious opportunities, and if we don't use them, we'll lose them, someone else will have them, and this wonderful life that God gives us will slip away without us knowing what it can be. In that Old Testament reading, read so well by Mark there must have been 30 difficult Jewish words in there, and they just rolled off him. Beautifully done, Mark, who takes drama and has other gifts that came out. Anyway, in that reading, the Israelites had been in a trough for about 20 years. They had come back from Egypt to the Promised Land, and they had been quite well behaved for a while, and they were sailing on their own, and judges would arise when need be to chase off the enemies. But then they had gone into a trough where they had been selfish, not looked after the widow and the orphan, and things had gone bad, and they'd been taken over by a neighboring king with his 900 chariots of armor led by Sisera. And so they'd been struggling and in trouble, and they called out to God, and God said, it's time for a change. It's time for Israel. They've learned their lessons, and now it's time for them to grab strength. And one person named Deborah read those signs, and she listened to God. She was called a prophetess. And she spoke up. She said, now is the time to move. And it's so interesting how Deborah became a prophet, in my opinion, how she could listen to the voice of God. Daily, she sat under her palm and she judged people. People came to her with their personal problems, and she listened and she heard. And then an idea would come to her, inspired by God, how they could turn a problem into a blessing. And so daily living like that, she built up skills that helped her to seize the moment. And she called Barak, a leader of the army, and she said, you don't have to do much. Just get 10,000 from each of the 2 northern tribes. There were 12 tribes you could go. 20,000, just enough to make the neighboring king mad so that he sends his 900 chariots over to get you. And then the Lord will deliver you. It doesn't say here, but Barak, the military leader of Israel, had trouble with it. And his immediate reaction was to say, Deborah, you come with me. I don't think this is going to work unless you, the prophetess of God, are there. And it is said that God said to Barak, Barak, the job will be done, but you will not capture Sisera. Just to insult you, a non-army person will capture Sisera. It was a woman who lived on her own, a single woman, and she will capture him. Just to show that your lack of faith, your missing of the moment, is not a good thing for Israel or for anyone. And of course, those chariots of iron were bogged down in the mud. Their greatest strength became their greatest curse, and Israel was free, and they had a few good years after that. We heard from Gloria about the history of Holy Trinity School and how 20-some years ago, almost 25, when you think of how they did some planning before in advance, people saw an opportunity here. And they went for it. They were well connected to one another. There was an amazing community, as you still have here. They also knew how things worked, and they said, let's have a school. And I can tell you, I've heard stories where the bishop at the time said, there are enough schools. We don't need any more. And these people went up to the bishop and said, oh, yes, we will do this, bishop. And then they started this school with 66 people. And people came on and joined bit by bit over the years. And they've risen to the wonderful educational institution they are now, with so many wonderful students and teachers there. I can tell you from my own experience that passion for taking a chance, that sensitivity to the times is still there in spades, because we're always having people going out saying, what is contemporary now in education? How can we integrate computers? How can we learn from the new? Well, at the core of that school is a group of people who have a passion for learning, a passion for teaching. They take the new stuff in, but they also are very true to what works day by day with students. And above all, there is this feeling, this connection that they have with the students, that people actually care, that teachers care, and it makes the students care. If you could only see graduation day in grade 12, I tell you, the hugs that people give to their teachers and the thanks that they give, this emotional bonding that's there and is expressed, is a beautiful thing. The professionalism, the ongoing risk-taking, and the heart, the giving, the risk, the trusting. It's such a beautiful thing. I also think, and I may be a bit biased in this regard, that it also has a lot to do with the idea that they still integrate faith into the school. They integrate Christianity. So I can stand up in front of the school and I am free to say, there is a God who long ago saw that the world was ripe in the time of Caesar Augustus to come down amongst us and live and be a part of us, to take a risk, to take a chance, to empty himself, as Paul says, and so show the world what God was and what we can be. A person who, in the form of Jesus Christ, who took only 3 years to pass that message on and to train others to follow him. A person who saw in one very busy week with a very bad ending that this would be a time to show people what sacrificial love and faith was all about, and how God could raise people up no matter what happens, if only people would trust and love. And so I get to say things like that at Holy Trinity School. And then I get to refer to how we can carry on like that. This past week I talked at Remembrance Day about a man named Nicholas Winton, and I won't go into his story very much, but here was a man back in 1938, a banker and investor, who had left Germany as a Jewish man, or his father had. And they had moved to England and become Christian and left their Jewishness behind because of the persecution they felt in Europe. And this was a man who in 1938 was called back to Czechoslovakia. And there he saw these little Jewish children, 2,000 of them, being persecuted, and the death camps awaiting them. And Nicholas Winton used every skill he had developed as a banker, and he was able to get, of the 2,669 of those people over to England and to safety. And now to this day, there's 5,700 of these people still alive, including, if you used to follow the CBC News years ago, Joe Schlesinger. He was one of them. You can see, there's a movie out about this. I won't go into it anymore. But I always love to show the students at HTS how it doesn't take much. You can use the skills you've been given. You can use your gifts to help in some small way when the time is right, when God delivers an opportunity up for you. Let me just close with a very brief little story by a little 5-year-old named Natalie, because I also took my theme to the grade 5s and I said, does anybody here in this class give me an example that I can end my sermon with of a time when you took an advantage of an opportunity even though you were afraid? And little Natalie raises up her hand and she says, one time I was taking non-competitive gymnastics and I loved it so much. I looked forward to going out and doing it. And she said, then my coach came up to me and said, you should try the competitive stream. And I immediately thought, oh no, I'm not doing that because all the fun will go out of it. People are watching you and judging what you're doing. And then after that fear, she said, I thought that the coach believed in me. My parents believed in me. And she said, I'd seen those competitions and I thought, I can do that myself. And so she said, I stepped up to the plate, I tried it. And she said, that has made all the difference. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.